Margaret had always been a woman of quiet habits. At 74 years old, her days followed a rhythm as steady as the ticking of the old clock in her living room. Every morning, after feeding her cat and watering the small row of plants on her porch, she would take a slow walk to the diner at the corner of Maple Street. It wasn't a fancy place, not the kind of cafe you'd find in the city with shiny lights and loud music. It was small, a little worn around the edges, with chipped tiles near the counter and the smell of freshly brewed coffee always hanging in the air. But Margaret liked it that way. The diner felt safe, like a second home where nothing ever changed. She liked to sit by the window, in the same booth she had chosen for nearly 20 years. From there she could watch people come and go, neighbors hurrying to work, children rushing to school, and sometimes, if she was lucky, she caught sight of young couples holding hands. It made her smile, though sometimes it also made her heart ache with memories. Margaret was a grandmother, but not in the way most people imagined. She had once dreamed of holding tiny hands, of baking cookies for giggling children who would call her grandma with shining eyes. But life had not given her that gift. Her only daughter, Anna, had died young. It was the deepest wound Margaret carried, a loss so heavy that even time could not fully soften it. She rarely spoke about it, but sometimes, when she was alone at night, she found herself whispering her daughter's name as if Anna might still hear her. That morning began like any other. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm, golden glow over the sleepy town. The streets were quiet except for the distant rumble of a truck and the soft chirping of birds. Margaret wrapped her scarf tighter around her shoulders and made her way to the diner. She walked slowly, her steps careful, but there was still a lightness to her stride. Despite her age, she tried to keep a spark of cheerfulness alive. She believed that even the smallest joys, a cup of hot coffee, a friendly smile from a stranger, could make the day worth living. When she pushed open the door of the diner, the familiar bell above it jingled. The sound always comforted her. Inside, everything was the same as it had been yesterday and the day before. The checkered floor, the red leather stools lined up at the counter, and the framed black and white photographs on the wall of the town's early days. A few regulars were already there, sipping their coffee and reading newspapers. The air was warm and smelled of bacon, butter, and freshly baked bread. Margaret inhaled deeply, letting the scent wrap around her like a blanket. She made her way to her booth by the window and placed her purse beside her. Normally, old Sam, the waiter who had worked there for decades, would bring her coffee before she even asked. But today, something was different. A young waitress walked up to her table, holding a notepad and wearing a bright smile. Margaret noticed her immediately. She didn't remember seeing her before. Perhaps she was new. The diner didn't often hire fresh faces, which made her appearance stand out all the more. The waitress had a gentle way about her, moving carefully between the tables, her ponytail bouncing slightly as she walked. She wore the simple uniform of the diner, a light blue dress with a white apron tied neatly around her waist. When she reached Margaret's table, she spoke with a soft voice, "Good morning, Can I get you something to drink?" Margaret looked up at her, ready to give the usual answer, "Just coffee, dear," but the words caught in her throat. She found herself staring, almost forgetting to breathe. There was something unusual about this girl, something that stirred a feeling deep inside her chest. Margaret quickly blinked, forcing a smile, and answered, "Yes, coffee, please. Black. And maybe some toast." The waitress nodded with a polite smile and scribbled on her notepad. "Coming right up," she said, before moving away. Margaret watched her walk back toward the counter, her hand steady as she poured the coffee into a thick white mug. She shook her head slightly, telling herself not to be silly. Maybe she was just imagining things. After all, she was an old woman now, and sometimes her mind played tricks on her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the girl was familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Something about her posture, her movements, even the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was all too striking. Margaret felt her chest tighten, but she told herself to stay calm. It was probably nothing. The girl returned with the coffee, setting it gently on the table. "Here you go," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that reminded Margaret of spring mornings long ago. For a moment, Margaret was lost, staring into the young woman's face. She noticed her eyes then, bright hazel, flecked with green. They seemed to shine even in the dim light of the diner. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her cup. She looked away quickly, afraid of what she was feeling. She took a sip of coffee, hoping the bitterness would ground her, but her mind was elsewhere. The image of those hazel eyes lingered, pulling her back in time. Her daughter had the same eyes, exactly the same. No one else in the family shared them. It had been Anna's special gift, something that made her unique. Seeing them now, in the face of a stranger, was like seeing a ghost walk into the diner. Margaret told herself it was impossible. Her daughter was gone, and those eyes had been buried with her. Yet as she sat there, the warmth of the coffee doing little to calm her racing heart, Margaret knew her morning at the diner was no longer ordinary. Something had shifted. Something she couldn't explain but would soon change her life forever. Margaret sat very still in her booth, her coffee untouched, her hands trembling slightly on the table. She tried to tell herself that she was overthinking, that old memories were only playing tricks on her mind. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that the young waitress was more than just a stranger. It wasn't only the hazel eyes that unsettled her. It was the way they seemed to carry the same spark of kindness and mystery that her daughter's eyes once held. When the waitress returned with Margaret's toast, she smiled warmly. "Here you go. Do you need anything else?" Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but instead of words, a strange wave of emotion rose inside her. Her throat tightened. She stared again into those eyes, and for one fleeting second, she saw her daughter. It was as if Anna herself was standing there, smiling, alive. The sight made Margaret's chest ache. She gasped softly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "My God, you have my daughter's eyes." The waitress froze, startled. Her smile faltered as she looked down at the older woman, unsure what to say. The diner grew quiet. A man at the counter glanced over his newspaper, and a couple of teenagers in the corner stopped talking, curious about what was happening. Margaret's words had carried just enough for others to hear. Margaret realized she was holding the waitress's hand. She hadn't even noticed when she reached out and grabbed it. Her thin fingers clutched the girl's wrist with surprising strength for her age. The waitress blinked in surprise but didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, her brows knitting with confusion. I'm sorry," she asked softly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Your eyes," she repeated, her voice breaking. "They're the same as my Anna's. Exactly the same." The young woman, her name tag read Emily, shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the small crowd of eyes now watching them. She gave a nervous smile, trying to ease the tension. "I think you must be mistaken," she said gently, but her voice trembled too. Something about the way the older woman was looking at her stirred feelings she couldn't explain. Margaret shook her head fiercely, her grey curls bobbing. "No, I could never mistake them. I've looked into those eyes every day for 20 years until the day she was gone." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stop the sob threatening to escape. Emily's heart pounded. She didn't know what to do. No one had ever said something like this to her before. She had been told since childhood that she was adopted, but her adoptive parents never gave her details about her real mother. Whenever she asked questions, they would simply say, "You were meant to be with us. That's what matters." But deep down, Emily always wondered about her past. She wondered if somewhere out there, someone carried the same eyes, the same smile, or the same laugh. Now, hearing the trembling voice of this grandmotherly woman, Emily felt a shiver run through her. Could it be possible? Was this more than a coincidence? She gently pulled her hand free, though not rudely. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Margaret leaned closer, desperate. "Please," she said, her voice pleading. Tell me where you come from. Tell me who your mother is." Emily hesitated. She glanced around nervously, aware of the silence in the diner. The cook had stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag, watching the scene unfold. Finally, Emily swallowed hard and said, "I don't know much about her. I was adopted when I was a baby. My parents never told me who she was." The words hit Margaret like a lightning bolt. She clutched her chest, her breath catching. Adopted. Her daughter Anna had given birth before the accident. Margaret had always suspected there was more to the story, but no one had ever told her the truth. Could it be that the child had survived, hidden away, lost in the folds of time? Her hands shook as she whispered, almost to herself, "It's you. Dear God, it's really you." Emily stared, wide-eyed, her own heart racing. She didn't understand fully, but the look in Margaret's eyes, the mixture of shock, grief, and overwhelming love, made her chest tighten. She had seen longing before, but never like this. The diner seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The air was heavy with something unexplainable, something that felt bigger than all of them. For Margaret, it was as if the world had cracked open, letting in a piece of the past she thought was gone forever. For Emily, it was like standing at the edge of a mystery she had spent her whole life unknowingly searching for. Margaret finally released a shaky sigh and leaned back against the booth. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. "You don't know what this means," she said softly. "I thought I had lost everything. But here you are." Emily didn't know how to respond. A part of her wanted to back away, to tell herself this was nonsense. But another part, deep in her heart, wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that fate had somehow brought her here, to this diner, on this very morning, to meet the woman whose eyes were so full of love it almost hurt to look at them. She took a deep breath and said quietly, maybe we're not strangers after all." At that moment, the bell over the diner door jingled again, breaking the silence. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence commanding the room. Margaret didn't notice him yet, her gaze still fixed on Emily. But soon, his arrival would change everything. The diner felt strangely heavy, as if the air itself had thickened. Margaret sat trembling in her booth, her wrinkled hand still hovering near the place where she had touched the young waitress's wrist. Her coffee had gone cold, her toast untouched. She could not take her eyes off the girl standing before her. Emily shifted nervously, holding her order pad against her apron. She had been a waitress for almost 2 years, and she was used to cranky customers, small-town gossip, and the occasional awkward comment. But nothing like this. Nothing that could make her heart pound so hard it felt like it might burst out of her chest. The old woman's words echoed in her mind again and again. "You have my daughter's eyes." Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to smile politely and walk away, pretend this was just an odd misunderstanding. But she couldn't. Something inside her told her not to brush it off. There was a strange pull between her and the old woman, like a thread tying them together across years neither of them could explain. Margaret finally broke the silence. Her voice was shaky but firm. "I know what I saw," she said, leaning forward, her eyes glistening. "Those eyes, they're not just similar. They're the same. My Anna had those eyes. No one else in the world did." Emily bit her lip. She wanted to be respectful, but the intensity in Margaret's voice frightened her. She whispered, her words soft. "I don't mean to upset you. I was adopted when I was a baby. I don't know anything about my real mother. Maybe this is just a coincidence." Margaret's breath caught. Adopted. The word only deepened the storm of emotions inside her. She reached out again, this time gripping Emily's hand tightly, as if letting go meant losing her forever. "No," she said, her voice breaking but determined. "This isn't coincidence. Please, listen to me. My daughter, she died young. But before she did, she had a baby. A baby I was told never survived. For years, I believed that child was gone. But now I see you standing here." Emily's eyes widened. A shiver went down her spine. Could this be true? Could she really be connected to this grieving woman? She pulled in a sharp breath, her thoughts spinning. She had always wondered about her birth parents, about the life she was taken from. Could this be the missing piece she had searched for without even realizing it? Her lips trembled as she asked, "Are you saying, you think I'm your granddaughter?" Margaret's tears spilled freely now. "Yes," she whispered. "I know it in my heart. I feel it. I've been waiting my whole life for this moment, though I never believed it would come." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the cook in the back had stopped clattering pans. A few customers were staring openly, while others pretended not to listen but leaned closer all the same. Small towns thrived on stories, and this one was unfolding right before their eyes. Emily shifted on her feet, her throat tight. She had spent years trying to accept that she might never know her real family. And here was this woman, claiming to be her grandmother, her words heavy with love and certainty. A part of her wanted to run, to escape the stares and the overwhelming flood of emotions. But another part, stronger, deeper, wanted to stay and hear more. "I don't know what to believe," Emily said softly. Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed locked with Margaret's. "I've always wondered who my mother was. I've always wondered why no one ever came for me. If what you're saying is true, why didn't anyone tell me before?" Margaret let out a long, shaky sigh. She didn't have all the answers. "I don't know, child," she said. "I was told lies. I was told you were gone, lost forever. But if you were adopted, then someone kept you safe. Someone raised you. And now, after all these years, fate has brought us together." Emily felt her throat tighten again, tears stinging her eyes though she tried to blink them away. She had always been grateful to her adoptive parents, but she had also carried an empty space in her heart, a space where questions lived. Who was she really? Where did she come from? And now, standing in front of this trembling old woman, she wondered if the space inside her was finally being filled. Still, doubt lingered. "But how can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Margaret smiled through her tears. "Because when I look at you, I see my daughter. I see her smile, her eyes, her kindness. A grandmother knows. I could never be mistaken about this." Emily swallowed hard, her hands tightening on the notepad she still held. She felt the eyes of the diner on her, but in that moment, it was only the two of them, the hopeful grandmother and the lost granddaughter who had never known where she belonged. For the first time in years, Margaret felt alive, as though her heart had been given back to her. But she also knew this was only the beginning. If Emily truly was her granddaughter, there were secrets to uncover, truths to face, and perhaps even pain to relive. Still, she didn't care. All that mattered was the girl standing before her. Emily, too, felt the weight of something far bigger than herself pressing down on her. A new chapter was opening, and though she didn't yet understand it, she couldn't turn away. The bell above the diner door jingled again, breaking the intensity of their moment. A tall man in a sharp suit stepped inside. His presence was commanding, almost intimidating. Margaret and Emily didn't notice him yet, lost in their discovery, but his arrival would soon pull their fragile new bond into a storm neither of them expected. The sound of the bell above the diner door cut through the thick silence like a knife. Every head turned, grateful for a distraction from the strange and emotional scene unfolding between the old woman and the young waitress. A tall man stepped inside, his presence filling the small room in an instant. He was dressed in a dark, perfectly tailored suit that looked far too expensive for a place like Maple Street Diner. His polished shoes clicked against the checkered floor, and a heavy gold watch gleamed on his wrist as he adjusted his cuff. People recognized him at once. Even in a small town like this, everyone knew his face. His name was William Whitman, though most called him Mr. Whitman. He was a billionaire, a man who had built an empire out of real estate, factories, and investments no one else understood. His picture often appeared in newspapers and magazines, but in person he seemed even larger, more powerful, almost like someone who did not belong in the same world as ordinary folks. The regulars in the diner whispered quietly. "What's he doing here?" One man murmured to another. "Doesn't he usually eat at that fancy restaurant in the city?" No one expected to see him walk into their humble diner. Mr. Whitman's sharp eyes scanned the room as though searching for something, or someone. He did not look at the menu board or at the tables of curious townspeople. Instead, His gaze swept the diner with a restless energy, as if he was impatient. His shoulders were stiff, and his jaw was tight, as though he carried a burden heavier than the fortune he was known for. Emily noticed him immediately, though her thoughts were still tangled with Margaret's emotional words. She had seen him before from a distance, driving his sleek black car through town. He was one of those men people admired but also feared. Still, she straightened her apron and forced a polite smile. A customer was a customer, no matter how rich or intimidating. "Good morning, sir," she said, approaching him with her notepad ready. "Would you like a table?" Mr. Whitman's eyes fell on her, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Recognition? He covered it quickly with a nod and followed her to a booth in the corner. Emily placed the menu in front of him, though she doubted a man like him cared about bacon and eggs. He probably had chefs cooking him meals worth more than her weekly pay. "I'll have coffee," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of command. "Black. Nothing else." Emily nodded quickly and hurried to the counter. Margaret, still seated at her booth, had not taken her eyes off Emily. But now her gaze shifted, landing on the newcomer. At first, she didn't react. He was just another man in the diner, though unusually well-dressed. But as she looked closer, her brow furrowed. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. When Emily returned with his coffee, Mr. Whitman watched her closely. He studied her face with a kind of intensity that made her uneasy. She set the cup in front of him and offered another polite smile. "Here you go, sir." He didn't thank her. Instead, he asked quietly, "What's your name?" The question startled her. Most customers didn't care about her name unless they read it off her badge. She hesitated before answering, "Emily." Mr. Whitman repeated the name under his breath, almost like he was testing it. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the coffee cup to his lips. He took a sip but seemed lost in thought, staring into the dark liquid as though it held secrets. Margaret noticed the way he looked at Emily, and her instincts stirred. There was something about this man, something unsettled in his eyes. It was the same look she had seen in herself for years, someone haunted by the past. The diner returned to its quiet hum of clinking dishes and low chatter, but beneath the surface, a strange energy lingered. Emily went back to check on Margaret, who was still dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "Are you all right?" Emily asked softly. Margaret gave her a watery smile. "I'm fine, child. More than fine. I can't believe this is happening. You don't understand what this means to me." She reached for Emily's hand again, but Emily gently pulled back, aware of the curious stares from other tables. From his corner booth, Mr. Whitman's gaze followed them. His chest tightened as he listened. Though their voices were low, he caught enough to understand. Daughter's eyes, granddaughter, adopted. Each word was like a stone thrown into the still waters of his memory, stirring up waves of guilt and fear. He set his cup down with a sharp clink, his hand trembling slightly. He had come to the diner for a simple reason, to escape the suffocating world of wealth and business for just a moment. But instead, he had stumbled into something he never expected. The girl, the waitress named Emily, was not just another face. She was connected to something from his past, something he had tried for years to bury. Margaret turned her head and saw him staring. For a moment, their eyes locked. She didn't know why, but a shiver went down her spine. The way he looked at Emily wasn't casual. It was the gaze of a man who knew something, perhaps something neither she nor Emily understood yet. Emily felt it too. When she glanced at him, she saw not just wealth and power in his eyes, but fear. Fear and recognition. She didn't know why, but it unsettled her more than the old woman's tears. The diner carried on, waitresses moved between tables, and dishes clattered in the sink. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Margaret had just declared Emily as her granddaughter. Emily was caught between disbelief and hope. And now, a billionaire sat in the corner, listening, watching, and carrying a secret so heavy that even he could not hide it for much longer. His entrance had changed everything. The diner felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to lean in, the air thick with unspoken words. Margaret's wrinkled hands trembled as she held her napkin tightly, her eyes fixed on Emily as though the young waitress might vanish if she dared to blink. Emily, on the other hand, stood frozen beside the table, her notepad still clutched in her hand, her heart beating faster than she could control. Emily finally broke the silence. "I told you," she whispered nervously, "I don't know anything about my real mother. I only know that I was adopted when I was a baby. That's all." Her words made Margaret's breath hitch. Adopted. The confirmation was like another spark thrown into the fire that had been burning inside her since she first saw Emily's hazel eyes. She leaned forward, her voice quivering but determined. "Then it must be true. You are hers. You are my Anna's child." Emily blinked, unsure what to say. The word hung in the air. Child. She had been someone's child, of course, but she had never known who. Her adoptive parents had been loving, but they never spoke about her past. Whenever she asked, they grew silent, uncomfortable, as if the truth were too heavy to carry into the light. And now, this stranger, this grandmotherly woman, was speaking the truth she had longed to hear her whole life. Margaret reached across the table again, her fingers brushing Emily's arm gently, more tenderly this time. "My daughter, Anna. She was only 23 when she died. She was my only child, my pride, my joy. And before the accident, she gave birth to a baby. A little girl. But after the crash, the hospital told me the baby hadn't survived. They told me she was gone." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling like a candle flame. "I lived with that pain for decades. I buried my daughter and the baby she carried. But looking at you, I know they lied. I know you survived." Emily's knees felt weak. She had to grip the back of the booth to steady herself. Could it really be true? Could the puzzle pieces of her life finally be fitting together? A grandmother she never knew existed was now sitting in front of her, pouring out a story that sounded like something from a dream or a nightmare. Her voice was faint, uncertain, but hopeful. "You're saying, I'm your granddaughter?" Margaret nodded firmly, her tears spilling freely now. "Yes. I feel it in my bones. In my soul. I've never been more certain of anything." Emily's mind raced. For years she had looked in the mirror, wondering where her features came from. The shape of her eyes, the curl of her hair, the small dimple in her chin. Her adoptive mother would smile and say, "You're just our miracle, darling." But Emily always felt incomplete, like she was living half a life without knowing the rest. And now, here was an answer she had been waiting for without even realizing it. Still, doubt lingered in her heart. "But how can we know for sure?" she whispered. "What if it's just coincidence? People can look alike." Margaret's hands tightened around her napkin. "It's not coincidence," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I know my daughter's face. I know her eyes. You carry her with you. No stranger could ever convince me otherwise." At the corner of the diner, Mr. Whitman's coffee sat untouched. His hand rested on the table, clenched in a fist. He had been listening to every word, his sharp features betraying the storm raging inside him. He closed his eyes briefly, memories from years ago flashing through his mind. Memories he had buried deep, secrets he had sworn never to reveal. Emily noticed him watching and felt uneasy. There was something strange about the way he looked at her. Something heavy, almost guilty. She turned back to Margaret, needing answers only the old woman seemed ready to give. "Tell me about her," Emily said softly. "Tell me about my mother." Margaret's face softened into a bittersweet smile. "She was bright, like sunshine," she whispered. "She loved music, and she used to hum while she worked in the garden. She had a laugh that could fill a room. She was stubborn too, like me, but she had the biggest heart. She wanted to give her child the world." Margaret's voice cracked, and she reached for Emily's hand. "She wanted to give you the world." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She had always imagined her birth mother as a shadow, someone faceless and distant. But now, Margaret's words painted a picture so vivid she could almost see her. Young, smiling, humming to herself under the sun. A woman she had never known, but suddenly missed with a deep, aching longing. The diner was hushed. Even the clatter of dishes in the back had stopped. Every ear was tuned to the quiet, trembling voices of two women discovering each other across decades of loss. Emily swallowed hard, her voice breaking. I wish I could have met her. Margaret's tears spilled over. She reached out, cupping Emily's cheek gently. She lives in you, she whispered. Every part of you is proof that she was here. And now, by God's mercy, I have you. Emily's heart thudded painfully, torn between disbelief and hope. She wanted to believe this woman. She wanted it desperately. But fear gnawed at her. What if it wasn't true? What if she let herself believe only to be crushed by disappointment? She looked down, whispering, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel. Margaret squeezed her hand firmly. Just let me love you, she said softly. That's all I've wanted my whole life. To love the granddaughter I thought I'd lost. Emily's chest ached as if something long buried inside her was awakening. She didn't speak, but for the first time, she didn't pull her hand away. And in the corner, Mr. Whitman's face had gone pale. His breathing quickened as he realized the truth he had avoided for years was now rising to the surface. The past was no longer buried. It was alive, sitting at a diner table, staring at him with hazel eyes flecked with green. And soon, he would no longer be able to hide. The diner was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Emily stood frozen beside Margaret's booth, her hand resting lightly in the old woman's trembling grasp. Margaret's face was glowing with tears, but there was also a strange peace in her eyes, as though a missing piece of her soul had finally returned. Emily didn't speak. She was still trying to take it all in. Her entire life, she had lived with unanswered questions about who she was. Now, in the span of a few minutes, she was being told she had a mother who had died young, and a grandmother who had never stopped longing for her. It was almost too much to believe. From the corner booth, Mr. Whitman watched them closely. His coffee sat untouched, his broad shoulders stiff. He tried to keep his expression calm, but inside he was unraveling. He had come to the diner only to escape the pressures of his world for a few minutes, but fate had drawn him straight into the past he had spent years trying to bury. His eyes fixed on Emily. He saw more than just a waitress in a cheap uniform. He saw the echo of a woman he had once known, a woman whose life had ended too soon. And he saw the truth. The young girl was not a stranger. She was a living reminder of a secret he had carried for decades. Margaret finally noticed his stare. She turned her head and narrowed her eyes, studying him. Something about the way he looked at Emily unsettled her. It wasn't just curiosity. It was recognition. Why are you staring at her like that? Margaret's voice was sharp now, her protective instincts rising. Emily glanced at him too, her stomach tightening. Do you know me? She asked softly. The billionaire hesitated. His throat felt dry. For a moment, he considered lying, pretending he knew nothing. But the weight of years pressed down on him, and he knew he couldn't stay silent forever. His voice was low, rough, almost breaking. Yes, he said. I know who you are. The words dropped like stones in the diner. Margaret's eyes widened, her hand clutching Emily's tighter. Emily's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs. You know me, she whispered. Mr. Whitman leaned forward, his hands shaking as he rested them on the table. I knew your mother, he said slowly, each word tasting bitter with guilt. I knew her very well. Margaret gasped. Anna? You knew Anna? He nodded, his eyes clouded with memories. Yes. She worked for one of my companies many years ago. She was smart, kind, and she had dreams bigger than the world would allow. She didn't just work for me. She was important to me. He paused, his voice catching. When she died, I thought I had lost everything connected to her. But then, his gaze shifted to Emily. Then I learned about the baby. Emily's knees nearly gave out. The baby. Mr. Whitman's face was pale now, his voice trembling. You were the baby. After your mother died, there were complications, secrets, things I can't fully explain. But I knew you hadn't died. I knew you were out there somewhere. I funded the orphanage where you were placed. I kept track of you from a distance. But I never had the courage to step forward. I thought it was better that way. Emily's head spun. The room felt like it was tilting. All her life she had wondered why no one came for her. Why no one told her the truth. And now this man, this powerful billionaire, was admitting he had known, all along. Margaret's voice rose, sharp with anger. You knew she was alive? You knew my granddaughter was alive and you said nothing? You let me believe she was gone. Mr. Whitman lowered his head, shame clouding his face. I thought I was protecting her. Protecting both of you. The world I lived in was full of lies, power, and danger. I didn't want her growing up under that shadow. I thought she would be safer with another family. Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks. Safer? You robbed me of her. You let me grieve for a child who was alive all this time. Her voice cracked with fury and heartbreak. Emily stepped back, her chest heaving. Her whole world was collapsing and rebuilding at the same time. So all these years, she whispered, you knew who I was? You let me grow up not knowing anything? You could have told me. You could have told her. Mr. Whitman's voice shook. I was a coward. I couldn't face you. Every time I thought about coming forward, I saw Anna's face. I saw how much I failed her. And then the years kept passing, until now. Silence fell again, thick and suffocating. Margaret's sobs echoed softly, while Emily stood frozen, her tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't know if she should hate him, thank him, or collapse under the weight of it all. Mr. Whitman looked at her, his eyes hollow with regret. I never stopped watching over you, Emily. I know it doesn't erase the pain, but I made sure you were cared for. I made sure you had opportunities. I thought it was enough. But seeing you now, I know I was wrong. Emily's lips trembled. Why now? She asked. Why tell me now? His voice broke. Because I can't hide anymore. Seeing you here, with her, he gestured toward Margaret. It's like the past has come alive. And I can't carry this secret any longer. Margaret shook her head, her heart aching with both rage and relief. You should have told me years ago. You should have told both of us. But now it's too late for Anna to know. Too late for her to hold her child. Emily covered her mouth with her hand, her body trembling. She felt torn between two worlds, between the grandmother who had just found her, and the powerful man who claimed he had been watching over her all along. In that moment, Emily understood one thing. Her life would never be the same. The truth had been hidden for too long, but now it had burst into the open, raw and painful. And none of them, neither Margaret, nor Mr. Whitman, nor Emily herself, could ever go back. Dinah felt like a storm had rolled inside it. Margaret sat trembling in the booth, her face wet with tears, while Emily stood beside her, her eyes wide, her heart thundering in her chest. Across from them, Mr. Whitman looked like a man falling apart. His expensive suit and polished shoes no longer mattered. His face was pale, his eyes dark with years of guilt, and his hands shook as he tried to steady himself. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of his confession hung in the air like thick smoke. Margaret's words echoed over and over, you should have told me years ago. You let me grieve for nothing. Emily's questions still cut through him. Why now? Why not before? Mr. Whitman gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His chest heaved as if each breath took more effort than the last. He looked at Emily again, those hazel eyes flecked with green, the same as Anna's. The sight pierced him like a blade. He had lived his life building empires, commanding boardrooms, and bending the world to his will. But in that moment he was powerless, broken by the truth he had hidden for too long. Emily noticed something change in him. His shoulders slumped, his face grew strained, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. She stepped forward quickly, her instincts as a caring soul overtaking her confusion. Are you all right, sir? She asked softly, her hand half raised. Mr. Whitman opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lips moved soundlessly, and then he pressed a hand to his chest. His expression twisted in pain. The room seemed to tilt around him. William. Margaret's voice cracked with alarm. Though her anger had been burning moments ago, now it was replaced by fear. She recognized the signs instantly. Oh, God. He's having a heart attack. The diner erupted into chaos. Chairs scraped the floor as people rushed to see what was happening. A man at the counter shouted, "Call an ambulance," and someone grabbed their phone. The cook hurried out from the kitchen, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. Mr. Whitman staggered, trying to rise from the booth, but his legs gave way. He collapsed onto the floor with a heavy thud. Gasps filled the room. Emily rushed to kneel beside him, her hands trembling. She had been trained in basic first aid years ago, and though her mind was spinning with shock, her instincts pushed her into action. "Sir, stay with me," she cried, her hands gently shaking his arm. His face was pale, his breath ragged, his eyes unfocused. Margaret slid out of the booth, dropping to her knees on the other side of him. Her old bones ached, but she didn't care. She reached for his hand, her own shaking violently. "Hold on," she begged. "Don't you dare leave now, not before the truth is out." The other customers stood in a circle, some whispering, some praying, some frozen in fear. The siren of an ambulance could not yet be heard, but the minutes dragged like hours. Emily pressed her hand against his chest, trying to calm him. "Breathe slowly," she urged. "Help is coming. You'll be okay." But Mr. Whitman's eyes darted between Emily and Margaret, and in them was something more than pain, something like desperate urgency. He tried to speak, his lips trembling. Finally, a hoarse whisper escaped, I should have told you sooner." His eyes lingered on Emily. "You were all I had left of her." Tears slid down Emily's face. "Don't talk like that," she whispered fiercely. "You'll get through this. Just hold on." Margaret clutched his other hand, her heart torn. A part of her still hated him for the years of silence, for letting her believe her granddaughter was gone. But another part, the part that had once been young and believed in forgiveness, saw only a frail, broken man who carried guilt heavier than any fortune could weigh. "Save your strength," Margaret said softly, her voice shaking. "You're not done yet. There's still more to say." Mr. Whitman coughed weakly, his body trembling. His face twisted with pain, but he gave a faint, sad smile. "I never thought fate would bring us all here," he whispered. "Anna would have wanted this. She would have wanted you both, together." His voice faded into a rasp. Emily squeezed his arm, her tears dripping onto his sleeve. "Stay with us, please." The sound of sirens grew faint in the distance, growing louder with each second. The flashing red lights soon reflected against the diner's windows. Relief rippled through the crowd, but Margaret and Emily stayed close, refusing to let go of him. Two paramedics rushed inside with their equipment. "Step back, please," one of them shouted as they knelt beside Mr. Whitman. Emily and Margaret reluctantly moved aside, though Margaret kept hold of his trembling fingers until the very last moment. The paramedics worked quickly, checking his pulse, attaching wires to his chest, and speaking to one another in clipped, professional voices. "Pulse is weak. Get the oxygen mask." Margaret clutched Emily's hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear. Emily held on just as firmly, her heart racing. In less than an hour, her life had turned upside down, and now she was watching the only man who might hold the final pieces of her story slipping away before her eyes. Mr. Whitman's eyes fluttered open for a moment as the oxygen mask was placed on him. He looked at Emily one last time. Through the mask, his words were muffled but clear enough to hear, "Don't waste this chance. Family is everything." Then his eyes rolled back, and the paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher. Margaret sobbed, pressing a hand to her lips. Emily stood frozen, her body trembling, as the paramedics wheeled him out the door and into the waiting ambulance. The sirens wailed again as they sped away. The diner was silent once more, but it was no longer the same. Everyone had witnessed something that morning that would stay with them forever. Margaret turned to Emily, her face pale but determined. She squeezed the girl's hand. "No matter what happens to him," she said firmly, "you're not alone anymore. You're mine, and I'll never let you go again." Emily burst into tears, falling into Margaret's arms. The storm of the past hour had left her shaken, but somewhere inside, a fragile seed of hope had been planted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just Emily the waitress. She was a granddaughter. She was part of something bigger than herself. And though Mr. Whitman lay fighting for his life, his collapse had forced the truth into the open, tying them together in ways none of them could escape. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, leaving the diner in stunned silence. Chairs were slowly pushed back, whispers rose, and the hum of ordinary life tried to return. But the room still carried the weight of what had just happened. Margaret sat heavily in her booth, her body shaking from the rush of emotions. Emily stood beside her, pale and teary-eyed, her mind spinning with too many thoughts to hold at once. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Margaret reached out and took Emily's hand again, this time with no hesitation. Her grip was firm, strong in spite of her age. Emily didn't pull away. She let herself feel the warmth of that wrinkled hand holding hers, a warmth that spoke of family, of love that had been missing her entire life. Margaret's voice was low but steady. "I don't know what will happen to that man," she said softly, glancing toward the door where Mr. Whitman had been carried out. "But I do know this. You are not going to be alone anymore. Not while I still breathe." The words struck Emily's heart like sunlight breaking through a storm. For years she had wondered who she belonged to. For years she had looked in the mirror and seen only questions. Now, even though her life had been thrown into chaos, she had an answer. She wasn't just an adopted girl with no past. She had a grandmother who had been waiting for her all along. Tears blurred Emily's vision. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I've never had. I don't even know what it feels like to have a real family." Margaret squeezed her hand tighter. "Then we'll learn together," she said with a trembling smile. "We'll take one day at a time. I lost my daughter, but God has given me you. I won't waste another moment." Emily's chest ached with both joy and sorrow. She thought about her adoptive parents, who had loved her but never shared the truth. She thought about her mother, a woman she would never meet but who lived in her blood, her smile, her eyes. And she thought about Mr. Whitman, the billionaire who had collapsed at their feet, burdened by secrets he had carried for too long. He might not survive, but his final words rang in her ears, "Family is everything." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. The cook insisted Emily take the rest of the day off, and the other waitress covered the tables. Margaret and Emily left the diner together, walking slowly down the quiet street. The sun was higher now, bathing the town in golden light. People passed them by, some offering sympathetic nods, others whispering about what they had just witnessed. Emily felt exposed, but Margaret walked proudly beside her, holding her arm as if she had been doing it all her life. At one point, Margaret stopped and looked up at her granddaughter, her eyes shining. "You even walk like her," she said softly. "Your mother. The way you hold your shoulders, the way you move, it's just like Anna." Emily smiled faintly, her throat too tight to answer. She wanted to believe every word. She wanted to feel her mother's presence in her movements, her smile, her voice. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a stranger in her own skin. That evening, they sat together at Margaret's small home, a cozy little house filled with old photographs and books. Margaret pulled out a worn photo album, its corners frayed, its pages yellowed. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling, and placed it in Emily's lap. "This was your mother," she whispered. Emily stared at the pictures. A young woman with hazel eyes and a bright smile looked back at her. She was laughing in one photo, holding a bouquet of flowers in another. In one, she was sitting on a bench with Margaret, their arms around each other. The resemblance was undeniable. Emily traced her fingers over the photos, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "She's beautiful," Emily whispered. Margaret nodded, her own eyes wet. "And she lives in you." For hours they talked. Margaret shared stories about Anna, how she loved to dance in the rain, how she once painted her bedroom walls the brightest yellow she could find, how she dreamed of traveling the world but always came back to her small town. Emily listened, hungry for every detail, storing them like treasures in her heart. When the night grew late, they sat quietly together, the bond between them no longer fragile but real and alive. Emily leaned her head gently against Margaret's shoulder, and Margaret kissed her hair, whispering, "I thought I'd never have this. But here you are." The phone rang suddenly, breaking the stillness. Emily jumped, and Margaret hurried to answer. It was the hospital. Mr. Whitman was alive, though weak. He had survived the collapse, but the doctors said he needed rest and serious care. Margaret set the phone down slowly, her expression complicated. Emily asked in a whisper, "Will he be okay?" Margaret nodded. "For now. But he has much to answer for." Emily thought of his pale face, his desperate eyes, and his whispered words. She didn't know if she could forgive him yet, but she knew he was part of the story too. Somehow, their lives were tied together now, whether she liked it or not. That night, as she lay on the couch under Margaret's quilt, Emily stared at the ceiling. Her life had changed forever in a single day. She had found loss, love, truth, and family all at once. It was overwhelming, but beneath it all was a spark of hope. Tomorrow would not be easy. There would be questions to answer, pain to face, and choices to make. But for the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel like she was walking through the world alone. She had a grandmother who loved her, a mother's memory to guide her, and perhaps, even a chance to heal the wounds of the man who had carried so much guilt. It wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. A new beginning, written not in secrets and silence, but in truth, love, and family.